who's actually going to get the most out of a 15.6-inch gaming laptop that's trying to balance a sleek, portable chassis with a desktop-class GPU, and who would be better off putting their money into a bigger desktop tower or a cheaper Ultrabook? Is the price tag justified for someone who just wants to pop in a game after work, or does it only make sense for a serious gamer who travels and needs that power on the go? If you're sitting on the fence, keep listening. I'm going to break down the real-world experience so you can decide if this is the laptop you should click buy on. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. I spent the last week running this Lenovo LOQ through a mix of everyday tasks and the kind of gaming sessions that usually push a laptop to its limits. What I found was a mix of solid wins and a few compromises that only become obvious once you start using it daily. First, let's talk about the kind of user who actually benefits from the LOQ's design. If you're a gaming on the move type, someone who streams on a couch, hops on a flight and wants to keep the high frame rate experience, or you're a college student who needs a machine that can handle both coursework and the latest releases, the 15.6-inch screen, 144Hz refresh rate, and RTX 5060 are the main draws. The screen is IPS, so you get wide viewing angles and decent color accuracy for both games and video editing. In my own testing, the 144Hz panel made fast shooters feel buttery smooth. I could actually see the difference between 60 frames per second and 144 frames per second when I played a competitive FPS for a couple of hours. On the other side of the spectrum, if you're someone who primarily works from a desk, plays casually, or already owns a desktop with a more powerful GPU, you might be paying for power you'll never really tap. The LOQ's chassis is slim for a gaming rig, which means the cooling solution is doing a lot of work in a confined space. Under prolonged heavy loads, say, a 2-hour raid in an MMO or a marathon of a graphically demanding RPG, the fans ramp up noticeably. The laptop does stay within safe temperature ranges, but you'll hear the fans more often than you would on a bulkier desktop-class machine. For a user who's sensitive to noise, that could be a deal-breaker. Now, let's look at the practical strengths that matter after you unbox it. The AMD Ryzen 7 250 CPU paired with 16 GB of RAM gave me more than enough headroom for multitasking. I was able to have Discord, a web browser with multiple tabs, and a game running simultaneously without any hiccups. The 512 GB SSD is fast enough that game load times felt comparable to a desktop NVMe drive, though you'll quickly notice that the capacity fills up if you keep a large library of AAA titles. In real life, I had to move a couple of older games to an external drive after hitting the 400 GB mark, which is a workflow many gamers are already comfortable with. Connectivity is another area where the LOQ tries to be all-in-one. It ships with Wi-Fi 6, a decent selection of USB-C and USB-A ports, and an HDMI 2.1 output. I tested the Wi-Fi performance on a 5 GHz network and saw stable speeds that kept my online matches lag-free. The HDMI port actually let me plug the laptop into a 4K TV and still maintain 144 Hz at 1080p, which is useful if you want to switch between a portable setup and a home theater gaming session. However, there's no Ethernet jack, so if you rely on a wired connection for the most stable ping, you'll need a dongle. The real hidden trade-off shows up in battery life. Gaming laptops aren't known for marathon runs on battery, and the LOQ is no exception. With the screen at 144 Hz and the RTX 5060 under load, I got roughly 1.5 to 2 hours of playable time before the charger kicked in. In everyday use, web browsing, video streaming, light photo editing, the battery stretched to about 5 hours, which is respectable for a machine that houses a dedicated GPU. If you expect to game on a coffee shop outlet for a few hours without plugging in, you'll be disappointed. Another point that often gets glossed over in marketing copy is the keyboard. The LOQ uses a full-size island-style keyboard with perky RGB lighting. The keys have a decent travel distance, and the actuation feels responsive enough for fast-paced shooters. I didn't notice any ghosting when spamming multiple keys, which is something competitive gamers care about. The downside is that the keyboard isn't backlit with a uniform color. You have to set each zone individually through the Lenovo Vantage software, which can be a bit fiddly if you just want a simple white glow. So, who should walk away? If you're a budget-conscious gamer who's fine with 1080p 60 frames per second and doesn't need a 144Hz panel, you'll find better value in a slightly older model or a desktop where the same amount of money buys.